Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is our final PA Forum session of the summer, really. So we have done two online sessions every week since March during lockdown, and we're going to finish on a big bang and a high today with the world of PR for PAs. So I'm delighted to be joined by Hannah and Robin from Make More Noise. They are the official PR company for PA Forum and work with clients in Birmingham and across the UK as well. And they do a fantastic job for us, and we're really, really keen to share this session with us today. So welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
I think we're all very excited to hear about the world of PR and some great messaging. So I'll hand over to you, ladies.
Thank you very much. So my name is Hannah Hatfield, and I am the founder and director of Make More Noise. And we are a PR agency based in Birmingham. I founded the business myself in 2015 and have been developing it in partnership with Mark Wright, who won BBC's The Apprentice since 2017. I'll explain a bit more about that when we get into the presentation, but just for Robin to introduce herself as well.
Hi, my name's Robin Smith. So I'm Senior Account Manager at Make More Noise, and I've been working with Hannah since the start of this year. My PR background spans over 7 years. I've got kind of experience across lots of different sectors, but at the core of what I do, I would say, is kind of more corporate work. So I've worked with quite a lot of financial services companies, including Lloyds Bank, and quite a lot of law firms as well. So I know that I think a few of the members from the forum operate in those sectors. And I've been working with Dan during my time at Make More Noise to help promote the PA Forum as well.
Thank you. So today, the presentation that we've got actually includes our new branding, which was meant to go live last Friday. So we haven't changed it back to our current one because we want to push forwards with it. But if you could kindly not screenshot the branding and share it on social media, that would be great. So I'm going to share my screen and start the presentation. I am going to turn my camera off because where I am in the office, the Wi-Fi is not very strong. So I'll do that now. Hang on.
We love a good Wi-Fi issue, don't we? And there's when it's on Zoom.
Hang on.
Thank you, Hannah. That's
Okay.
We're all good.
I will. Okay. Can everybody just see the greenish screen with the logo? Perfect.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So just to go through what we're going to talk about today, so we're just going to give a bit more of a background information about us as a business. We're then going to move into what PR is, what it stands for, the difference between PR and advertising. We're then going to give you a bit of a case study around Mark, who won The Apprentice, and explain kind of how we started working with him and what we've done as a PR strategy from building his profile after winning The Apprentice to where he is now, which I hope you'll find useful from a corporate reputation perspective. We're then going to move into talking about how we create PR strategies, something that we internally call the PR pyramid, how to write a press release, how to measure PR, and then some different PR tips. And then after that, we'll look forward to taking some questions. Obviously, if you've got any questions as we move through, if you could put them into the chat box, more than happy to answer them as we talk, or at the end, however Dan sees fit, really, that's okay. So as I've briefly touched on, Make More Noise is a PR agency headquartered in Birmingham city centre. I founded the business in 2015 as I fundamentally believed that on the businesses that I worked for, PR could be done better with a focus on the business and constantly delivering results. There's sometimes a bit of a negative reputation around PR agencies for charging high retainers but not delivering consistent results on a monthly basis, and that's something we pride ourselves on as a business. In terms of sectors, we work with a lot of different sectors, including professional services, quite a lot in the corporate world, consumer as well, but one of the things that ties them together is a lot of the brands that we work for are quite entrepreneurial. So we do a lot with the individual business owners who are looking to build their profile and build awareness of their brand in order to engage with target audiences and build brand awareness and obviously ultimately sell product or service. But build reputation first. We particularly specialise in PR strategy, media relations, personal profiling, crisis management and content as well, be that for thought leadership, web content or other copywriting services. So moving into what is PR, Robin?
Yeah, so there can be quite a lot of kind of disparity between what PR actually is. So I thought, I know some of you have got your microphones switched off and some of you are using the chat function, but I thought it would be good to start by just getting some of you to comment with what your understanding is of PR, and if maybe you don't have a very clear understanding of it, we hope to address that in this session.
So we've got public relations. Anybody else got? You can take yourselves off mute as well if you want to, and give us your opinion. Positive.
Public relations is obviously what PR stands for, but more broadly, yeah, positive promotion, communication, yeah. Okay, so to give you a bit of a broad definition, you'll be able to see it on the slide here. Public relations is the practice of deliberately managing the spread of information between an individual or an organisation, such as a business, and the public. And in brief, it's a controlled narrative that shapes public perception about an individual or business. In our industry, we find a lot that people can often get marketing and PR confused, and also advertising, because there is some crossover between them and they do have their similarities. However, there is a very distinct difference between each of them. So I thought it would be quite useful to explain to you what PR isn't, rather than just what PR is, and the difference between PR and advertising. So what PR is not is paid for. So there's two different types of media. You have earned media and owned media. So owned media is basically anything that you pay for. So if you place an advert in your local newspaper, or an advertorial slot, which would be kind of like an editorial piece accompanied by an advert, that's called owned media. So you kind of own the narrative. And earned media, which is what we do, is basically where you don't pay for it. You don't pay to get that guaranteed placement within a publication. You kind of work over time to build established relationships with key media contacts, and to build that trust. So often it can kind of come across as a little bit more of a trustworthy promotion for a company, and people tend to buy into it more. And another thing that PR is not is purely focused only on building sales. Obviously that for many businesses is the ultimate goal, but that's kind of usually one element of the broader strategy, and it's not all just about pushing sales and being very kind of in your face with the sales message. So I found a good quote which pretty much sums this up for you and hopefully should make it very clear the difference between advertising and PR. Advertising is saying that you're good, but PR is getting someone else to say that you're good. And so I think that's quite a nice way of summing it up. Does anyone have any questions just on that topic of what PR is?
That's fabulous, thank you. Love the quote.
Yeah, it's quite a good one. I mean, we find quite a lot of people, even like my parents, don't really still after 7-8 years don't really understand what PR is. So it's quite nice to have a little bit of an overview there to explain the difference, because they are two very different things.
I think it took me a while to understand what an advertorial was, because I know you got advert and an editorial, mash it together.
Basically,
yeah, that took me a while to get, but I think I can clearly see the difference now between PR and advertising. 100%.
Yeah, and that's not to discredit advertising either. They both serve a purpose, but in our experience, and the reason why we entered into this industry is because it's just it's more authentic, I would say. You're not just pushing a sales message, you're not just sort of ramming it down people's throats. It's a lot more strategic, a lot more discreet in how you approach things. And yeah, that's true as well in the chat here, and what people say about stay behind your back and how you can influence that. So it is a lot to do with reputation management, public perception, and kind of controlling the narrative around either you as an individual or your firm or business, and having kind of some control over that, rather than it just spilling out into the public domain without you having any involvement. So moving on, this is just a nice quote from Hannah. So this is something we really believe in and kind of our ethos within Make More Noise. So when PR is done well, it becomes integral to the growth and success of any business. And many of our clients can vouch for that. A lot of them have seen quite exponential growth since we've helped them to build their public reputations and profiles. Yeah, Hannah's going to talk you through a case study now.
So with, I was going to give you a bit of background into how I started working with Mark. So when you win the Apprentice, just a bit of background information, a bit of insight knowledge, you have no choice over the PR company that you choose. You're forced to work with an agency that are headquartered in London. I won't name them, but they are a very good agency and very good at what they do, but they're very consumer focused, which means if you run a consumer business, when you win the Apprentice, they're great for you. But if you run a B2B organisation, they're not as good because they don't have the kind of B2B knowledge or strategy. So when Mark first won the Apprentice, this is the type of media coverage that he was getting. He would often get contacted by journalists from the Nationals, so like from the Daily Mirror and the Sun, who would kind of just ring him up for what he would deem or thought was going to be a positive interview. And then he would say something in that interview negative about the likes of Katie Hopkins, for example, and then it would form a headline in the Mirror or the Express. For example, she's disgusting and knackered, Mark Wright blasts Katie Hopkins. So when I first met him, we were both working for a boutique hotel in Worcestershire, which we both actually still work for. I was doing their PR and he was doing their digital marketing. So he runs a company with Lord Sugar called Climb Online, which do digital marketing. And he was telling me about the trouble he was experiencing in the media after winning the Apprentice. And I explained to him, hang on, apologies, no. It's another example. Explain to him it's because he hasn't actually got a strategy in place that is supporting his business objectives and what he wants to be perceived as an individual. So another ridiculous example is a headline about Duncan Bannatyne ruining his love life. I think he said something along the lines of that his girlfriend's better looking than Duncan Bannatyne's or something, and then it went on to form a headline. So I think it was a strong lesson in what you should and shouldn't say to the media when you're on the phone to them. And then at the same time, I would say it's a bit of a responsibility from the PR agency's perspective to not pitch and secure interviews that would actually be relevant to what he wanted to achieve with his business, so with Climb Online, and how he wanted to build his profile. So in meeting him, I advise to be able to sort this out and to build a strategy that would actually work and prove beneficial to him. And obviously that starts with objectives and goals. So in speaking to him and in meeting him, he said that he wanted to be perceived as an inspiring entrepreneur and he didn't really care about winning, although obviously it's something that's proved incredibly valuable. He didn't want to be known really all the time as just somebody who's won the Apprentice. He wanted to be perceived as somebody who's actually good at business, and he was actually a good entrepreneur. So his main objectives from a personal point of view was to be perceived as an inspiring entrepreneur, and to be known as the founder of one of the UK's fastest growing digital marketing agencies, which is obviously Climb Online, to be a leader and a thought leader in digital marketing, and to be the most successful Apprentice winner ever. In addition to his objectives for his personal profile, he wanted to build awareness of Climb Online to the company as a leading digital marketing agency within the sector. And to do that, we would obviously need to consistently report on the company's business growth and milestones and the clients that they were winning, because actually every time we released something about Climb Online winning a big client, it would result in interest from further big clients, and they would then sign up because they would be positioned as an agency that could work with them. So after working with him for several years, so we have actually been working with him since 2015. Now, because we've built such a good profile, we don't have to do as much PR activity, but these are the types of opportunities we get now. So he regularly comments on relevant business issues in the likes of publications like City AM. He regularly gets interviewed on LBC talking about relevant business issues and is perceived as a credible entrepreneur. They were listed as the top in the Startups 100, and they achieved position 6, so which means they were the 6th most successful business in the UK in the Startups list. We regularly do thought leadership content around digital marketing. He got picked, so the Telegraph here, he was actually picked by Amex to do a campaign to promote their business credit cards, because he has built such a good profile as an entrepreneur. Obviously regularly put on the brand success. They won TikTok as a client, and that did really well. And then he was listed in Forbes 30 Under 30, won UK Entrepreneur of the Year. They won as a company Entrepreneurs Team of the Year for Climb Online with the Great British Entrepreneur Awards. There's been loads of awards basically that haven't been included on this slide, but that's been one of the key things that we've achieved. The key difference, just kind of going back to this, is that this is content that would basically ruin somebody's reputation and position him as a bit of an idiot, really, that there's no other way to describe it. Somebody who wasn't able to kind of control what they were saying, who would regularly undermine other people. I think he was of the opinion that any press is good press, which certainly isn't the case. What we built here was somebody who is perceived regularly by the media as a credible and inspiring entrepreneur, somebody who has built a credible company in Climb Online. They are one of the UK's leading digital marketing agencies that have won clients like TikTok, which is obviously a well-known social media platform. Another secret as well is that he isn't actually the most successful Apprentice winner, but it's something that we have said consistently since 2015. So now every year when the media do their roundup of where are the Apprentice winners now, he is written as one of, if not the most successful Apprentice winners, because we've included it in the content every single time we write about him. So if the journalists are getting those messages that he's an inspiring entrepreneur, he's one of the most successful Apprentice winners, he owns Climb Online. Climb Online is the best digital marketing agency in the UK. The more and more journalists and obviously potential customers or relevant stakeholders read those messages, the more that they're believed. And it's not saying they're not true. He is very, very good at business, but you need to shape opinion, and it's impossible to do that without quality PR. So in terms of how we build PR strategies, so when we were kind of going back to how we built the strategy around Mark and Climb Online, we ask these same questions for him, and we do it for all of our clients. So who are you trying to reach and engage with as a company? Which platforms and publications do your relevant target audiences or stakeholders engage with? So what publications do you need to be in that are relevant to the people you want to engage with? Normally, we look at obviously target audiences, but we also look at positioning a company as credible within their industry. So trade press, even though, so say you're like a legal company or a law firm, we would still position you as a credible company within the legal publications. So you obviously stand as one of the top law firms of the country, as opposed to just targeting, I don't know, business press if you want to engage with people from a commercial law perspective. What are your core messages? So we generally say you need to pick around 3 to 5. If you haven't done PR before at all and nobody knows who your brand or what your company is or what you stand for as an individual, you need to pick sort of 3 to 5 core messages about who you are and what your brand stands for and what you want people to know about you. Because the more you consistently drip feed those messages into PR content, that is what people will perceive you as. Why do you want PR? I know that sounds ridiculous, but a lot of people want or think that they want PR because they've got it in their head that they want to be in the Sunday Times, and that's it, that they've got no other reason to do PR. It's more of like an egotistical thing, and really if you haven't got a PR strategy in place and you haven't built a profile, or if you haven't got a reason to be in the Sunday Times, you won't be. It's literally as black and white as that. And then something I always ask when we're pitching for new businesses, what is your PR utopia? As in, if after, because PR does take time, it's not an overnight success thing, it's something that builds over a period of months and even years. It took a good few years to kind of do a 180 on Mark's slaying of Katie Hopkins and Duncan Bannatyne to positioning him as a credible entrepreneur. So you have to be in it for the long game. But his PR utopia was Forbes, as in he wanted to be listed on Forbes 30 Under 30. So to do that, you can't just approach Forbes or apply to be on the list and expect to be on it if you haven't done anything relevant as an individual to be on it. Forbes measure the candidates for 30 Under 30 based on their profile, as it is quite PR focused, but also on what they've achieved in business. So if you aren't doing anything or telling anyone about what you've achieved in business, a publication like Forbes aren't going to know that. But this is what we've got here in terms of this pyramid is also relevant to PR strategies in general. You need to start at the bottom. So if you aren't releasing regular authoritative content on even LinkedIn or on your blog, that is the first place you need to start. So if you've got good thought leadership content, or anyone in the company, if you've got an opinion on something. So for example, we work in property, the change to the stamp duty announced, in the residential market, they don't have to pay stamp duty on properties under 500k. Anyone working in the property sector, we did content around that and what it means and how beneficial it is, and if it will have an impact or if it will enable the property market to grow as a result, etc. So that's just an example. So if you haven't got content like that going out on your LinkedIn, your blog, that's the first place to start. From there, you need to look at the business and identify newsworthy content, and you need to create a drip feed of newsworthy content that can go out to your target media, be that regional press, be that trade press, or be that business press, whatever it is. You need to build a comprehensive list and look at what you can release at least on a monthly basis to start creating a drip feed of press coverage. The best way to see if anyone does PR is to Google the company and then click news at the top of Google, because you should get a nice stream of press coverage which shows what you're doing as a business basically. And from there, it's looking at case studies. So you've got particular case studies of something you've done well for a client, or if you've turned something around for a business that you work with, building a case study around a client and pushing that out to the media is another way of demonstrating basically how good you are as a business without saying it. And then research pieces are very good from a brand perspective. So for example, just using Mark as an example, and Climb Online, if they did a research piece at the moment, just think of something relevant off the top of my head, they could research, say, 1,000 business owners and ask them what they were focusing on at the moment, or what they were getting a best return from a digital marketing perspective in the current pandemic, to find out what channels were proving most beneficial, if people had cut their digital marketing spend, or if people had moved their digital marketing spend from, say, social media ads to Google ads, and if they were getting a better result with that. And we would collate all of that data and make an engaging research piece to send out to relevant press, where the headline would be something that would engage people to read it, like 80% of businesses have cut their marketing spend and lost sales. And the point of that would be to demonstrate not only the data from the research piece, but to provide an opportunity for Mark or someone else from Climb Online to then give advice about what businesses should be doing at the moment with digital marketing. And they work in that way, and they prove a point that is relevant to the product or the service that you are selling without selling it, basically, to then show you as a thought leader. They're mainly the core things that we do from like a brand awareness, from a business perspective. And once you've kind of got that foundation as a company, you can then start building profile as an individual. And that is achieved with the next layer. So comment pieces, newsjacking, interviews are all things we do from a thought leadership and personal profiling perspective. So the CEO or the MD of your business should regularly be commenting on industry trends or developments or issues or relevant news stories within your publications. The more they do that, and the more they are seen as the go-to commentator, the more their profile builds. Not only will obviously journalists trust them and go to them more regularly, but people or companies looking to buy your product or service will perceive them as the main thought leader. The part of kind of building a strategy around the individual has grown massively, I would say, in recent years, particularly with the growth of like social influencers and Instagram and things like that, where people are far more engaged in the person and buying from people. Now, when you're building the reputation of a business, one of the things that works really well from a PR perspective is building the profile of the MD or the CEO. And that can obviously be in the media with comment pieces, newsjacking, interviews, but moving on from that with speaking opportunities at events. Obviously that's not available at the moment due to the current pandemic, but normally that's something we would progress into. So pitching them for speaking opportunities, awards, etc. And once you've done all of that for a period of time, then you can be listed on Forbes. not potentially that straightforward, but the point is you have to start at the very bottom with getting just even like a plan in place for LinkedIn content, blog content, news content before you build profile. It's not, as I said from the beginning, something that happens overnight, but that kind of should give an indication as to how we start building a strategy. Robin?
I think just going back to that as well, having the goal of being listed on Forbes is great, and for obviously it can only really be positive, but with a lot of people that we work with, they come to learn over time that being in the big national publications isn't necessarily the only way to success with their PR. So say you're a law firm based in a specific region, you could get more valuable return on investment by appearing in your local newspaper, because you're going to get in front of more prospective clients that way than if you were in the likes of the Times, that obviously is nationwide and gets picked up by people in all over the country, and people that aren't necessarily going to come to you as their go-to firm. So I think whilst that's great for profile building, depending on your objectives, and that's why it's so important to know what your objectives are and why you're actually doing PR in the first place. That might not even be something that you want to consider, because it might not even have bring you the return that you're looking for.
No, I completely agree. So your goal at the top might be something completely different, as in you just want to be within, seen as the go-to firm in your trade sector, and how you do that. This is kind of the example we used for.
This is more specific for Mark, but you might even think that that's your goal, but then actually when you've gone back, just going back to the points we went through earlier about thinking about your key messages, your objectives, and kind of the reason why you're doing PR in the first place. Once you've actually gone back through those, you might think, oh, I did think I wanted to be in this publication, but actually I might get more out of aiming for something else. So that's why it's so important to think about your objectives in detail. So we wanted to
say things like, things like being listed on Forbes, even though that's great from a credibility perspective, it's more of like a nice to have. It's not like a necessity. Whereas a necessity is having a consistent drip feed of quality press coverage. So you are regularly seen amongst your target audiences, and you have got that consistent brand, build a brand awareness, and you are building profile. That is far more important consistently than kind of just focusing on like a PR project for a few months, winning an award, and then not doing anything. It's better to kind of have an ongoing strategy on an annual basis than think of it project by project.
Which leads nicely onto the next slide. We wanted to make sure that we could bring you some value from this session, obviously, rather than just talking about what we do. So if you did work with a PR agency or an external PR consultant, obviously they would be able to kind of work with you to do all this planning for you. But times at the moment, obviously, everyone's in unique circumstances, and you might want to take this into your own hands and think about how to plan your own PR strategy. So this is a rough plan, an example of how we do things for a lot of our clients. So we like to put together kind of it's not always in a table, this is just one example, but we plot in, we try to look a minimum of a month ahead of time, just because it's much better to be more strategic than just reactive. So rather than something happening in your firm that might have been on the horizon but you've not really kept it front of mind, it's good to sort of know, so you've got a new appointment, you've got somebody new joining your company that's quite notable that you want to share news about. If you know that's happening in September, it's good to kind of plot that in advance of time, so that you can kind of build all your communications up in advance. So like I said, we like to look ahead of time, and sometimes we'll do plans for a month, 2 months, 3 months, or even up to 6 months sometimes. And these are just some examples of different types of communications. I don't know if we've gone into much detail on each of them, so some of them might not make a whole lot of sense to you at the moment. So press releases are generally used for communicating a basic news story. We're going to talk a bit more about press releases on the next section. But the most important thing to remember with press releases is that they serve the purpose of sharing something that's newsworthy. So you need to make sure it's something factual, so whether it's a new appointment, or you've opened a new office, or you've expanded your team, or you want to share kind of your a record like turnover figure or anything like that. That's what you would do with a press release. Interviews, as it suggests, you can get in touch with key journalists from some of the biggest sector publications that are relevant for your industry, pitch interviews with certain spokespeople within your company to help kind of build up their individual profile, and then in turn build up the profile of your firm. Comment pieces is all about establishing authority. So for example, one of the law firms that we work with, we do an awful lot of comment pieces across their employment team, their family and divorce team, and other teams to kind of demonstrate their expertise. So a recent example would be a comment piece that we wrote about how to protect your business and assets in the event of a divorce. So that was kind of aimed more at the average consumer, and if somebody picked up that that article and it was relevant for them, they might think to get in touch with that person who deals with family and divorce within the firm, because they've demonstrated in that article that they've got a lot of relevant knowledge in that space. And that's proven to be a really successful strategy for that particular client, whereas other clients might not. You know, it might not serve the same purpose. We might do more kind of traditional news and press engagement for them. Case studies, again, as it suggests, if you've got any kind of individual success stories or case studies that could supplement your press engagement, then you could feed that into your strategy. Social media speaks for itself. It's always good if you get press coverage to share it on your social channels, both if it's some coverage for a comment piece that's attributed to a specific person, it's good to share it on their individual LinkedIn profile and also the company's LinkedIn profile as well. And obviously, if you as an individual, because you might be just doing this from your personal perspective, you might want to publicize yourself and build your online reputation and public profile as a PA or EA, you could share that on your own profile as well. And then newsjacking is quite an interesting one. As PRs, obviously, we're very much immersed in the news agenda, so we're always on top of what's going on, even if it's just kind of nationwide news that might not be that relevant to our clients. We always want to know what's happening, but we pay a particularly close attention to our clients' individual sectors. And if there's a breaking news story, I'll use the example of divorce again. If there was like an announcement in the news today that said there's a huge spike in divorce rates since lockdown, which I think there has been, then we would want to get in touch with the journalist who wrote that story and pitch our representative from the law firm who works in the family and divorce team to comment for that article. And we'd get a comment written working with our client and send it out to all relevant journalists that might cover that type of story. And that's how you can stand a good chance of getting national press. So it's a lot more reactive, it's a lot quicker, it's less sort of strategic in terms of it's not really planned ahead. It's just kind of like keeping your eye out, and if you see a story, say you work in an accountancy firm and there's a big story and you think your CEO might want to be a spokesperson in that, then just keep an eye out for the story and then see if they're comfortable with putting a short quote together that you can email across to the journalist. So that's kind of how you can build an overarching PR strategy. And then I think we're going to briefly move on to how to write a press release as well. I'm conscious of the time because I'm sure you'll have some questions, but I think we'll send this template over to Dan so that he can circulate it with all of you in case you want to have a go at doing this yourself. If you don't have a PR person that you're working with specifically. Like I said, the purpose of a press release is to convey a news story. So the most important thing is that it's not self-serving, it's not an advert, it needs to be relevant to your audience, and a journalist isn't going to pay any interest in it if it just looks for something that's really self-serving, just saying how great you are. It needs to be more of a hard kind of news piece, really. So I won't break it down into too specifically, but you can see you'll have a heading at the top, which needs to really grab attention. Often, especially if you're sending it to a journalist, your heading will be in your subject line, and if it's dull, doesn't seem like it's relevant to their region or their audience, then they're probably just going to delete it because they're inundated with press releases and emails every day, as you can imagine. First paragraph you will use to kind of sum up, so you can think of this as your who, what, when, why, how. That's usually a good way to know how you basically want it to almost be like if you were to scrap the rest of the press release, you could pretty much know what the story was in a sentence. And then as you get further and further down in the press release, that's when you add in more information to kind of embellish and kind of add more elements of information, but they're kind of more nice to have, so not necessarily like critical to the story. And then as you move further down, we always like to include, and you should always include in your press release, a quote from a relevant spokesperson. So that might be your CEO, it might be somebody that has a specific team that's relevant to this story in particular. And we always, I mean, this is quite basic PR stuff, but at the bottom we always put ends so that you can see where all of the information finishes. You'll have your image so that the journalist will probably want to caption. It's always good to send across a good image with the press release. It usually heightens the chances of the story being picked up. So we've kind of had Dan's face splashed over quite a lot of stories. He's obviously got a very friendly face that the press like to feature. And then it's just good to have your media contact at the bottom so the journalist knows who to get in touch with if they've got any further questions. And one thing you can't see on this template, but I'm sure will be included in the one that we share with you, is notes to editors. So this is kind of just additional information that you can include about your firm that might not be relevant to the story, because you do want to keep the story quite concise and only include really key information that's relevant to that particular topic. But if you want to put a bit more information about the individual you're talking about or your firm, you can put it in the notes to editors so they've got access to that information, but it's not necessarily part of the press release itself. Yeah, and I think that's kind of it, but we will share that template with you so that you can use it and make use of it if an opportunity arises where you want to share some news.
The template has definitely got editor's notes on it.
Just couldn't put it on the page, yeah.
Wordy.
Yeah, that's
Nearly done, sorry Dan.
That's right.
So one of the things that we get asked quite a lot in PR, and I'm sure you might have thought it yourself, is how we actually measure the success of PR. We generally create KPIs for different companies that we work with. Some people value different ways of measuring over others. So for some people, as I said, they're quite transfixed on certain publications, whereas other people are more focused on the volume of press coverage. So we measure PR via the number of media placements that we achieve. So for some people, we would aim to, if every time we send out a press release, get, say, 5 pieces of press coverage or 8 pieces of press coverage, and that's deemed a success for that particular piece. Whether some people, well, a lot of people are focused on whether or not press coverage includes a link back to their website. That is becoming increasingly more challenging as media publications perceive it as a way to generate additional revenue, as if you pay for a link, basically. But there is value in having a link in press coverage, particularly from a publication that's more top tier, as it supports SEO without going into kind of too much technical information. So the higher the publication from a domain authority, which is again another way of measuring. So the domain authority measures, sorry, I feel like I'm going really technical now, measures the success, or sorry, the value of a publication. So a domain authority is out of 100. The likes of the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Mirror will all have domain authorities within the 90s. So if you've got a backlink to your website from a publication in the with a domain authority in the 90s, that would show up quite highly in Google for relevant keywords associated to your business. I would obviously provide a value from a Google search engine rankings perspective. The more press coverage you have with a higher domain authority with links in, obviously the better from that perspective, but that shouldn't be the be all and end all from a measurement point of view. As I said, media publications are seeing it as a way to charge additional fees from an advertising perspective if they're losing advertising revenue. What you should focus on from a measurement perspective is what is important, or what is the best publications to be in as a brand. As Robin was saying earlier, you might actually get more value from being in like a regional publication that is read by your target audience than actually being in the likes of the Sun. Your results, or how you measure your results, will come down to what your PR objectives are. So if your objective is, to consistently be in regional press, to engage with regional business, your measure of success will be how often you're in that regional press. And if you get business inquiries where people have advised they've read an article, like that would be deemed as a measure of success, but that isn't something we deem as a particular PR KPI. They're mostly based around the volume of press coverage, the level of activity, sometimes link-based, have people had an increase in web traffic, and then an old kind of hat measurement tool, which we don't really use anymore, but some companies still like, is AVE, which stands for Advertising Value Equivalent, which means if you paid for that amount of press coverage in advertising, how much would it cost? So a lot of the time we will get a figure from our press clipping service, which could be, so say we had a piece in City AM that was like an interview, that would come back as about £4,000. So the return on investment would be, you would want to achieve an AV of 5 or 8 times the amount of PR spend. So if that makes sense. So if you're spending £1,000 a month on PR, you would want to get an equivalent of £8,000 worth of advertising, and that would be deemed as a good return on investment from an AV point of view. As a lot of companies that we work with, and in the PR world, we don't really utilise that anymore, as the numbers are quite arbitrary. So we focus more on ensuring we've met the objectives and we've met the KPIs around volumes of press coverage, where press coverage is published, etc. Does that make? Has anybody got any questions on that? Because I feel I kind of whittled through it quite quickly.
No, I think it's great, because I think ultimately, if you're going to get into the world of PR, it's that we've hosted session before on return on investment for events, for example. So return on investment, return on objectives. And I think always with any campaign that anybody does nowadays, or anything that we do, or any business case that we write, or anything like that, the managers always want to know, well, what's the return on investment? What sort of thing are we getting back? So I think that's really good. But just to kind of relax, and I'm really grateful, ladies, because I think that's been really insightful. Particularly because I'm just going to give everybody an example. When I first started the PA forum, I didn't know that many PAs at all. And when we did our first event, just to go back to what you were saying about regional publications, the reason that our first event had 45 PAs at it is because the chamber shared a link, and if they hadn't shared that link on their daily news, I don't know whether we would have even had 45 people. And then when the PR company that I was working with at the time came along and picked that up, they then shared that, and then we had 100 PAs come to the next event, and then they came to that event and they wrote about that event, and then we had more PAs. And what was really great, and why I really enjoy working with Hannah and Robin, is I'm very tight, I'm not very organised. I'm not very organised in terms of my time and planning. And so when I sat down, this is the first year we ever had a comprehensive plan of what we were going to talk about each month for the PA forum. And that completely went out the window when COVID happened. But, I keep in touch with the girls, a lot, and say, we're doing this at the moment. What do you think? Or can you give me some advice on this? And suddenly it becomes a news story, and that inspiration is just so valuable. So has anyone got any, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording, just because if anybody wants to ask any questions, it'd be nice to kind of have a confidential kind of forum. So just bear with me 1 second.